Today, we're jumping headfirst into a constitutional mystery that literally brought a country to a standstill. Welcome to the case of the silenced parliament.
So let's get right to it. Here's the question that just absolutely rocked the United Kingdom. In this day and age, can a prime minister really just shut down parliament? Send everyone home, especially right in the middle of a massive national crisis? Well, believe it or not, that's the exact explosive question that ended up in front of the UK's highest court.
So how on earth did things get to this point? To understand the verdict, we've got to go back to where the whole crisis began. Okay, so it all happened incredibly fast. It's the summer of 2019, the Brexit deadline is just breathing down everyone's necks, and the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, goes to the Queen and advises her to prorogue Parliament. That's the official term for shutting it down. And not just for a few days, for 5 whole weeks. And this wasn't just any random 5-week period. It was the absolute crunch time right before the UK was supposed to leave the EU. So as you can imagine, the legal challenges started flying almost immediately.
And this right here is the heart of the conflict. You had two completely opposite stories. The government was saying, hey, this is totally normal, just a standard procedure before we start a new session. But opponents were shouting from the rooftops, calling it a constitutional outrage, a blatant move to dodge scrutiny and silence any debate on Brexit. That massive disagreement is what set the stage for this historic legal fight.
Now, to really get what the court was dealing with, we have to talk about the ancient, kind of mysterious power at the very center of this whole thing.
And that word is prorogation. What is it? Well, it's basically like hitting a giant pause button on Parliament. It's not about calling an election, it's just meant to formally end one session before starting another. It's a power that officially belongs to the monarch, but in reality, it's always done on the advice of the Prime Minister.
This chart is super helpful to see the difference. Dissolution is the big one. It's game over for that parliament, and boom, you're heading for a general election. Prorogation is supposed to be more routine. It just pauses things. But here's a key detail. Any laws that haven't passed yet just get dropped. And normally it lasts for a few days, maybe a week at most. 5 weeks? That was way off the charts.
And here is the absolute crucial point. This power to prorogue, it's not written down in any law passed by Parliament. It's what's called a prerogative power. The best way to think about it is like a traditional rule that's been around for centuries. Everyone just kind of knows it exists, but nobody ever bothered to write it down in the official rule book. And because of that, its limits had never, ever been tested in court. Well, until now.
So, the case lands at the Supreme Court. How did they even begin to untangle this? Well, they acted like constitutional detectives, and they broke the whole mystery down into 3 key questions. First things first, they hit a massive roadblock. The government's lawyers argued that this was pure politics. They said the Prime Minister's advice to the Queen was just not something a court should ever get involved in. So the first question was huge. Was this even the court's business to begin with? And the court's answer was a very loud, very clear yes. They made this brilliant distinction. They said, look, we're not going to judge the political reason for the shutdown. We're not getting into the why. We're here to answer a much more basic legal question. What are the limits of this power? And they said, defining the legal limits of power is literally our job.
Okay, so if the court can step in, what are the rules of the game? For a power that isn't written down anywhere, how in the world do you figure out where the line is? The court basically had to invent a legal test right then and there.
So they turned to their North Star, the single most important principle in the entire UK Constitution, parliamentary sovereignty. All this means is that Parliament, not the government, not the Prime Minister, is the highest source of law in the land. And if that's true, then no other power can be used in a way that just completely wrecks Parliament's ability to function.
So using that principle, they came up with their test. It's pretty simple, really. A prorogation is against the law if it gets in the way of Parliament doing its constitutional job, unless the government has a really good reason for it. This was a brand new line drawn in the constitutional sand. All right, so this is the final piece of the puzzle. They have their test, now they have to apply it to the facts. Did this specific 5-week shutdown, at this specific moment, cross that line they just drew? And for the court, the conclusion was just unavoidable. Yes, it did. I mean, 5 weeks was an incredibly long time. The timing was beyond critical with Brexit just around the corner. And this was the clincher. When asked in court, the government didn't offer any solid, reasonable justification for why it needed to be that long. So the court concluded the real effect was simple: to silence Parliament when its voice was needed most. So,
All of that investigation, all of those questions led to the final dramatic moment, the verdict that is absolutely going down in British legal history.
This case was so important that it wasn't heard by just a few judges. No, they assembled the maximum number possible, 11 Supreme Court justices, the top legal minds in the entire country.
And how many of those 11 judges disagreed with the final decision? 0. Not one. It was completely unanimous. A stunning, powerful statement from the highest court in the land.
The president of the Supreme Court, Lady Hale, delivered the judgment herself, and her words were just crystal clear, no messing around. The advice the Prime Minister gave to the Queen wasn't just a political mistake, it was unlawful. Period.
The result of that verdict is kind of mind-bending. The court ruled the prorogation was void and of no effect. What does that mean? It means in the eyes of the law, the shutdown was a total fiction. It was a blank piece of paper. It's as if it never, ever happened. Parliament wasn't legally paused. It was just illegally prevented from meeting.
So, okay, besides all the daily political drama, what's the lasting legacy of this incredible case? Why does it still matter so much?
Well, the impact was absolutely huge. The court sent a clear signal that even these ancient, unwritten powers have limits, and that the courts are the ones who get to define them. It was a powerful reminder that in the UK, the government is not above the law. And in a country without a single written constitution, this ruling effectively wrote a brand new, super important chapter about who holds the ultimate power.
And that leaves us with this one last, fascinating question to think about. This whole case started as a power struggle between the government and Parliament. But in the end, it was the Supreme Court that stepped in and decided the winner. It really makes you wonder, in a system that runs on unwritten rules, who really has the final say?